He kicked her out for confessing her love. 2 years later, he finds her at a bus stop, holding a baby that looks just like him. The rain tapped softly against the tall windows of the Grayson estate as dusk settled over the Virginia hills. Inside the vast modern mansion, silence reigned like a second master. The marble floors gleamed, the chandeliers hung still, and the fire in the grand hearth burned low, not for warmth, but to remind the house it was still alive. Caden Grayson stood alone in his study, gazing out over the wet grounds. At 36, he was one of the East Coast's most successful real estate moguls. Sharp-jawed, immaculately dressed, and emotionally impenetrable, Caden was the kind of man others feared disappointing. But success had not softened him. If anything, it had calcified the grief he buried deep 2 years ago, when his fiancée, Mariana, died in a car crash on their way to tour wedding venues. Since then, Caden's heart had shut like a vault. In the background, a soft clinking of china echoed from the hallway. Elora Finch, the quiet young maid with chestnut skin and cautious eyes, was preparing his evening tea. She had been working in the mansion for only 8 months, but never once stepped beyond her role. Caden noticed her, of course, not in the way a man notices beauty, but in the way a man trying not to feel anything notices warmth too close to his frozen skin. Elora moved carefully as if afraid of making a sound. She wasn't like the other staff. She never gossiped, never asked for favors. She worked late hours, took extra shifts when others called in sick, and once spent her entire lunch break scrubbing soot from the inside of the fireplace just because she noticed it was bothering him. Caden hadn't thanked her, but he remembered. What he didn't know, what she kept buried even from herself, was that somewhere between folding his shirts and dusting his bookshelves, she had fallen for him. Not because he was handsome or rich, but because she'd seen through the armor. The way his hand lingered on Mariana's photo, the way he stood at the window long after guests had left, the way he avoided anything that looked like joy. Elora didn't dream big. She never imagined being with him. She just wanted to help heal what was broken, even if he never noticed her. But a heart can only carry silence for so long before it breaks open. That night, as she stepped into the study, holding a cup of peppermint tea, his favorite, Caden turned slowly toward her. Their eyes met for half a second, and something flickered in both. But then, as always, he looked away. "Leave it on the desk," he said without emotion. Elora nodded. "Yes, Mr. Grayson." She placed the cup down gently, then hesitated, just for a moment. He didn't see it. Or maybe he pretended not to. Outside, thunder rolled across the hills. Inside, a storm of another kind was quietly gathering. The next evening arrived cloaked in winter stillness. The Grayson mansion, always grand and unfeeling, seemed even more distant under a silver moon. Caden sat alone in his study once again, a glass of untouched bourbon sweating on the table beside him. Papers lay scattered across the desk, contracts, profit forecasts, acquisition reports. But his eyes weren't reading anymore. They drifted again and again to the half-finished letter he had started to write, to no one in particular. Downstairs, Elora moved through the darkened kitchen, her apron dusted with flour, and her hands tired from preparing an elaborate dinner he barely touched. The rest of the staff had left early due to the forecasted snowstorm. Only she remained. She always stayed longer than necessary, as if the silence of the mansion needed one human heartbeat still pulsing inside it. But tonight, something in her chest was different, tighter. The walls she had built around her feelings, the endless restraint she'd practiced every day, were starting to splinter. For 8 months, she had watched a man unravel behind polished suits and cold eyes. She had seen more pain in his silence than in any words he could speak. And still, she remained invisible. Her mother had once told her, "Some men build palaces around their sorrow. If you're going to walk inside, be prepared to lose your way." Elora didn't want to get lost, but she was already there. With hesitant steps, she made her way to the study once more. Caden didn't hear her at first, lost in the low crackle of the fireplace and the distant echo of rain. When she cleared her throat gently, he looked up. For once, there was no mask on his face, just exhaustion, and something even deeper behind it, something raw. "I brought you some tea," she said softly. His gaze lingered on her longer than usual. Her voice was always calm, like river water. He didn't know how, but she always made the air feel warmer. "I didn't ask for any," he replied flatly. "I know," she answered, but I thought you might want it anyway." A beat passed. He gave a short, tired nod. "Leave it on the table." She moved closer, placed the cup gently beside his bourbon, and then, Without planning to, without permission from her own sense of self-preservation, she spoke the words she'd held in her chest for months. You don't have to be alone forever. The sentence hung in the air like a glass about to shatter. Caden froze. His eyes slowly lifted to hers. His voice, when it came, was colder than she'd ever heard. What did you just say? Alora's hands trembled slightly, but her voice didn't waver. I said, I see how much pain you're in, and you don't have to carry it alone. He stood up. The chair scraped the floor as he rose to his full height. Towering. His jaw clenched, his eyes narrowed. You're a maid, he said, each word cut from stone. You clean my house. You don't know anything about me? Her throat tightened, but she didn't look away. I know you don't sleep. I know you stop at Mariana's portrait every morning. I know you haven't celebrated your own birthday in years. I know. I know loneliness when I see it. His voice cracked like a whip. You're out of line. Alora blinked quickly, but the tears still slipped down her cheeks. I know, her voice faltered. I just needed you to know. Someone sees you. Caden took a step back. Anger, no, panic, flashed behind his eyes. He didn't know what to do with this. With her. With the mirror she had just held up to his soul. Get out, he said, almost whispering it. Now. She nodded once, then again, like her neck was the only part of her that still knew how to move. She turned and left without another word. That night, Caden stood alone in the study for hours. He didn't touch the bourbon. He didn't touch the tea. And in the silence she left behind, for the first time in 2 years, the fire finally went out. The following morning came cloaked in brittle silence. Snow had blanketed the hills overnight, muting the world outside the Grayson estate into a landscape of stillness. But inside the mansion, it was not snow that silenced the halls. It was absence. Elora was gone. She hadn't returned after the night before. No note, no request for her final paycheck, no goodbye. Just absence, sudden and sharp, like a thread that had quietly held something important together. And now it had snapped. Caden sat at the breakfast table, staring at the untouched food the cook had prepared hours earlier. The eggs were cold. The coffee had long since gone bitter. Yet he didn't move. His eyes stayed locked on the seat across from him, the seat where no one ever sat. It was empty now, as always. And yet today, it somehow felt emptier. He hadn't slept, not a second. After ordering her out, he had paced the study until the sun rose, replaying her words over and over. You don't have to be alone forever. No one had dared speak to him like that since Mariana. Not even his closest associates. Elora had crossed a line, and yet, the more he thought about it, the less it felt like a betrayal, and more like a rescue he refused to accept. By noon, Caden summoned his estate manager. Where is Elora Finch? He asked, his voice low and even. The manager blinked, confused. She didn't report to duty today. I assumed you let her go. Caden's expression darkened. No, he muttered. I didn't fire her. Well, she left. Her quarters were cleared out early this morning. He nodded slowly, then dismissed the manager. As soon as the man left, Caden pulled open his laptop and began typing furiously. He tried searching through old employee records, payroll logs, anything that would give him a clue. He found her hiring form, but the address she had listed was from 2 towns over and already out of date. He called the number on the file. Disconnected. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen. Frustration simmered beneath his skin, not because he was unused to losing control, though that was true, but because this wasn't business. This was something else. And for the first time in years, he felt afraid. Afraid of what he'd just pushed away. The rest of the day passed in a haze. Caden canceled his meetings. He ignored calls. He didn't leave the house. Instead, he walked the mansion like a ghost, passing the corners where she used to hum softly while cleaning, where she had once left a cup of tea with a folded napkin and a tiny handwritten note. Be kind to yourself today. He still had it, somewhere. Crumpled in the back of a drawer he never opened. By evening, the sun fell in streaks of pink across the snow. Caden found himself standing in the servants' quarters for the first time in years. Her room was stripped bare. The bed was made, the closet empty, but the air still smelled faintly of lavender and cinnamon. And on the windowsill, half hidden behind the curtain, lay a single bobby pin. He picked it up, held it in his palm. It was nothing, and it was everything. His chest tightened. How had he become this? A man who couldn't say a simple thank you. A man who had walled off his life so thoroughly that the first kindness offered to him felt like a threat. He sat down on the edge of the narrow bed and closed his eyes. He didn't cry, but something inside him cracked. And once it cracked, it didn't stop. 2 full years slipped by, quiet and relentless, like water carving through stone. Seasons changed outside Caden Grayson's mansion, but inside, time moved differently. Through reports, transactions, board meetings, and empty evenings. The world knew Caden as more powerful than ever. His company had expanded into 3 new states. He was named Businessman of the Year by 2 major magazines. Real estate investors chased his name like it was gold. But behind all the accolades, Caden remained untouched by joy. He moved through life in practiced precision. He dated casually but never seriously. He hosted elegant charity galas but always left early. His eyes were often on his phone, though no one ever called. And every year, on the same night in late autumn, he found himself unable to sleep, haunted by the image of a girl with cinnamon brown eyes and the quiet strength of someone who had once loved him enough to leave. Alora Finch had vanished without a trace. And though Caden had hired private services to quietly track her whereabouts, no lead ever held. She'd changed numbers, moved across county lines, likely paid cash. She didn't want to be found, and somehow, that hurt more than her leaving. Until one gray, bitter afternoon in late November, 2 years to the day since she left, fate did what pride could not. Caden's car, a sleek black Lincoln with tinted windows, rolled slowly down a congested side street just outside Charlottesville. He had just left a construction site and ordered his driver to take a quieter back route through town to avoid traffic. The snow had started again, light flurries drifting down from the sky like forgotten letters. At a tired old bus stop, barely sheltered by a cracked plastic overhang, stood a woman. Her coat was thin, her scarf pulled tightly around her face, and in her arms, cradled close to her chest, was a baby. Caden wasn't looking for anything, but his eyes drifted lazily toward the woman as the car slowed for a red light. And then they locked. His entire body went still. The air inside the vehicle thinned. He leaned forward, his heart thundering in his ears. "Elora?" he whispered to himself, barely believing it. He pushed a button on the console. "Stop the car." The driver glanced back. "Sir?" "I said stop the car. Now." Before the wheels had fully halted, Caden opened the door and stepped out onto the icy pavement. Wind slapped his face, but he didn't feel it. He didn't feel anything except the sudden heaviness in his chest. She turned slowly at the sound of the door. Her eyes, those same deep, gentle eyes, widened when she saw him. And just like that, time folded in on itself. She didn't speak. She didn't move. He took one step toward her. "Elora." His voice broke. Are you?" She looked down at the child in her arms. The boy was no more than a year old, maybe closer to 18 months. He had soft brown skin and a tuft of curly hair. But what struck Caden wasn't the resemblance. It was the way the boy looked back at him. Curious, watchful, familiar. "Elora, is he?" Caden couldn't finish the sentence. His throat clenched. Her eyes welled with tears. But she didn't cry. Not yet. She shifted the child higher on her hip and spoke quietly. "His name is Jonas." Caden swayed slightly, the world tilting under his feet. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, barely above a whisper. She hugged the baby closer. "Because when I told you I saw you, you told me I was nothing." He flinched like she'd slapped him. No fury in her voice, just a worn-out truth. "I tried to forget you," she added, eyes shining now. "I tried to move on, to build a life. I didn't expect you to find us." He took a tentative step closer, struggling to breathe. "I didn't even know I was looking anymore," he said. "But I never stopped feeling what I lost." Snow swirled around them as the light turned green behind Caden, and cars honked in the distance. But neither of them moved. She looked down at the child again. Jonas stared up at Caden with curious, serious eyes. Finally, she asked, "Why are you here?" Caden blinked, and something soft cracked behind his expression. His voice dropped low. "Because the man I was when I pushed you away died a long time ago." And for the first time in years, Elora didn't feel invisible. She felt seen. Caden stood motionless in front of her, his hands clenched slightly at his sides, not in anger, but in restraint. Every muscle in his body wanted to reach for her, to touch the child's cheek, to say something that could undo 2 years of silence. But the space between them wasn't just physical. It was built from hurt, mistrust, and the weight of everything left unsaid. Elora rocked Jonas gently, her eyes shifting between the man she had once cared for and the snow falling around them. The child squirmed in her arms and let out a small noise, his little hand reaching toward Caden as if drawn by some instinct he couldn't understand. That simple gesture, small, unintentional, hit Caden harder than any words could have. "Can we go somewhere?" he asked quietly. "It's cold, and I want to talk to you." Elora hesitated. She looked down the street at the bus that hadn't come, then back at him. Her instincts screamed to protect Jonas, to stay far away from the man who had rejected her when she had been most vulnerable. But something in Caden's voice was different now. Less commanding, more raw. Something in his eyes looked like repentance. "I'm staying at a friend's apartment," she said carefully. "Just for a while. I don't have a car." "Let me drive you," he said, stepping back and gesturing toward the black Lincoln. "I'll drop you off. I swear, that's all." She studied him for a moment longer before nodding slowly. The car ride was silent at first. Jonas was buckled safely in a borrowed infant seat the driver had fetched from storage. Leftovers from a time when Caden's assistant thought it might help to volunteer at a children's charity. The boy stared out the window, quietly mesmerized by the snow. Caden, meanwhile, stared at Elora like he might lose her all over again. "I owe you more than an apology," he said at last. Elora turned slightly toward him, but said nothing. "I was cruel," he continued. "That night, I was angry, scared, and too much of a coward to admit how much you meant to me. You reached out, and I punished you for it. And then, you were gone." Elora spoke softly. "I didn't leave to hurt you." "I know," Caden said. "I hurt myself. Every day after that." She looked at him, truly looked at him, and for the first time, she saw not just the man who once rejected her, but the man who had carried guilt every day since. The hollowness in his voice wasn't performative. It was lived in. "I found out I was pregnant a few weeks after I left," she said finally, her voice steadier than she expected. "I didn't tell anyone who the father was. I didn't want pity or judgment. I wanted to give Jonas a life built on love, even if it meant doing it alone." Caden swallowed hard. "I would have," she held up a hand gently. "I didn't tell you because I didn't believe you'd want him. Or me. And I couldn't let my son be unwanted." Caden's voice cracked. "He was never unwanted. Neither of you were. I just didn't know how to want anything without feeling like I was betraying what I lost." Silence settled again, but it wasn't sharp this time. It was soft, thoughtful. As the car pulled up in front of a modest two-story walk-up, Elora turned toward him. "I don't need anything from you, Caden. We're doing okay. I work nights. My friend watches Jonas while I clean houses. We get by." He nodded, but his eyes didn't leave her face. "I'm not here to take over your life," he said. "I'm not even asking for forgiveness. I want to know him. And if you'll let me, I want to make things right. Slowly. However long it takes." Elora opened the car door and unbuckled Jonas, who yawned and clung to her shoulder. Before stepping out, she paused. "You don't just get to appear and fix things with promises," she said. "Trust is earned. Love is earned." "I know," he said quietly. She looked at him for a long moment. Then, without another word, she stepped out into the snow and disappeared into the building. The car door closed gently behind her. Caden leaned back in the seat, his breath fogging the window. And for the first time in 2 years, he didn't feel alone. He felt like something had started. Small, fragile, but real. It had been 2 weeks since that cold November day when Caden found Elora at the bus stop, holding a child who mirrored his own eyes. 2 weeks that felt like a fragile, uncertain dream. Since then, he had driven her and Jonas home to a modest, drafty apartment on the edge of town. It was small, the wallpaper peeling in the corners, the heat inconsistent, but it was clean and filled with little touches that revealed the warmth Elora had built around her son. Hand-sewn curtains, a paper snowflake garland over the window, a worn but beloved rocking chair beside the crib. Caden had stood in that tiny living room for a long time after she invited him in. It was not the grand halls of his mansion, but for the first time in years, he felt something he hadn't felt even in his luxurious estate: belonging. Over the next days, Caden returned again and again, sometimes with diapers, sometimes with groceries, always with quiet humility. He never assumed. He never demanded. He just showed up. It was strange for him, learning the rhythms of Alora's life. She worked nights at a local diner, bussing tables and waiting on customers who barely noticed her. During the day, she stayed home with Jonas, reading him books, feeding him carefully measured meals, counting every penny and every hour. She had no help, no support, and yet she never complained. One evening, after Alora had put Jonas to sleep, they sat on the old couch side by side, a respectful space between them. The air smelled faintly of chamomile tea and baby lotion. The only light came from a small lamp near the window. "I watched you feed him earlier," Caden said quietly. "The way he looked at you, like you're his entire world." Alora gave a soft, almost sad smile. "To him, I am. For a long time, he only had me." "I hate that I wasn't there," Caden murmured. "I think about it every night, about how you must have gone through the hardest parts alone." She turned to him, eyes steady. "I was scared out of my mind, Caden. When I found out I was pregnant, I had nothing. No savings, no family, just a heart full of heartbreak and a name I didn't even know how to speak without pain." He swallowed hard. "Why didn't you try to go to one of those lawyers? Demand support? You had every right." She hesitated, then shrugged. "Maybe, but I didn't want to force you into being a father. I wanted someone who wanted this child, not someone who signed a check and disappeared." Caden leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "And now?" Alora stared at her hands for a moment. "Now, I see something in you I didn't see before. You're not the same man who threw me out of that study 2 years ago." He exhaled slowly. "No. That man died a little every day after you left." A long silence passed between them. Then, very softly, Caden continued. "Elora, do you remember the bobby pin on the windowsill?" She looked up, surprised. "What?" "After you left, I found it. Just a small thing. You must have forgotten it. But I kept it. All this time. I don't even know why. Maybe because it was the last piece of you I had left." Tears welled in her eyes, not from sorrow, but from recognition. From the realization that maybe, just maybe, she hadn't been invisible all along. "I still have the note," he added, "the one you left with the tea. Be kind to yourself today. I found it last week. I didn't throw it away." Her lips parted in a quiet gasp. Then she looked away quickly, wiping at her cheek. "Caden, I want to believe in this," she whispered, "but I need time. I need proof, not just words. I've built something fragile for Jonas, and I can't risk shattering it." He nodded. "Then let me build something solid beside you. No rushing, no expectations, just let me be near. Let me learn how to be the man both of you deserve." Elora's shoulders sank, as if some heavy weight had finally been acknowledged by someone else. She looked at him for a long time, then reached for his hand. Their fingers met, not tightly, but tentatively, like the beginning of a language not spoken in years. In that small, quiet moment, no promises were made, but something sacred passed between them. The healing had begun. Winter gave way to a shy, chilly spring. The snow melted slowly from the sidewalks, revealing dull patches of grass and the stubborn resilience of a city learning to breathe again after months of cold. With the changing season came a rhythm, an uncertain but growing rhythm, between Caden, Alora, and little Jonas. Caden began to visit every morning before work. He'd arrive at 6:45 a.m., with hot coffee for Alora and a paper bag of banana muffins, Jonas's favorite, though Caden had never eaten one himself. He didn't intrude. He didn't push. He simply stayed, holding Jonas while Alora prepared her work uniform, helping her zip up her old secondhand coat when her hands were too full. He'd begun to discover small, sacred things. The way Jonas reached for his hair with sticky fingers, the way he babbled excitedly at birds outside the window, the way his eyes always sought his mother when he fell and needed comfort. Caden didn't try to replace Alora. He simply stood beside her. One morning, Alora overslept after a long shift. When Caden arrived, she wasn't ready. The apartment was in a mild state of chaos, laundry piled in a chair, Jonas still in his pajamas, oatmeal bubbling over on the stove. She apologized, flustered and frustrated with herself. "I'm sorry, I should have set a second alarm. Everything's a mess. I look awful." Caden gently placed his hands on her arms. "You look tired," he said softly. "Not awful, just tired. And you don't have to do all of this alone anymore." Alora bit her lip. Her eyes filled with tears, but she quickly blinked them away. She nodded, and for the first time, allowed herself to sit while Caden took over, feeding Jonas, turning off the stove, folding half the laundry. That evening, Caden invited her to dinner, not at a luxury restaurant, but to a quiet, family-owned diner 2 blocks away. "We don't have to dress up," he said. I want to talk, somewhere new." She hesitated, uncertain. Then she saw the way Jonas reached for Caden's hand without hesitation now. How he laughed louder when Caden played peekaboo. "All right," she said, "but I'm not putting on makeup." "You don't need to," he replied. At the diner, they sat in a booth by the window. Jonas munched fries and smeared applesauce across the tray of his high chair, while Caden and Alora shared a pot of coffee. Conversation flowed easier than either of them expected. They laughed quietly. They told stories. Caden admitted he once tried to cook and burned instant oatmeal so badly it fused with the pot. Elora laughed until she cried. For a moment, they looked at each other, and neither looked away. Later that week, Caden asked if he could take Jonas for a walk on his own. Just an hour in the park. Elora hesitated. She'd never left her child with anyone, not even her closest friend. But after a long pause, she nodded. Caden returned exactly 62 minutes later, Jonas giggling and clutching a stuffed fox Caden had bought at a vendor's stand. "He calls it Mr. Wuff," Caden said proudly. "Did you name it that?" "No, he did. Or he made a sound that sounded like woof, and I made it a thing." Alora couldn't help smiling. "You're good with him." "I'm learning," Caden said. "He's teaching me." That night, when Jonas had fallen asleep and the apartment was quiet again, Alora walked Caden to the door. He paused before leaving and reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out something small. It was the bobby pin, the one she had left behind 2 years ago. "I kept it," he said, offering it to her. She stared at it, touched it gently, but didn't take it. "Keep it," she said softly, "as a reminder." "Of what?" he asked. Her eyes met his, steady and full of something deeper than forgiveness. "That you never lost your chance, only postponed it." He nodded once. No words could match the gravity of that moment. As he left, the hallway light flickered softly behind her, and Alora leaned against the door, hand over her heart. Not because it hurt, but because, for the first time in a very long time, it felt like it was healing. Summer came quietly. The sun lingered longer in the evenings, slipping gold across the rooftops of the city, softening even the sharpest corners of Alora's modest world. Her apartment, once a cramped box of survival, now breathed with warmth and laughter. Caden had never moved in. Elora wasn't ready, and he never once asked. But he was there every day, morning and night, like the sunrise and sunset, constant, present, patient. Their lives had become intertwined in ways both ordinary and extraordinary. Caden knew the exact sound Jonas made when he was sleepy versus when he was hungry. Elora knew which kind of coffee helped Caden think clearly during his business calls. They no longer performed kindness for each other. It had become second nature. Love wasn't spoken in grand declarations. It was in packed lunches, repaired door hinges, storybooks read for the 100th time, and the way Caden always made sure her bus fare was covered, even if she never asked. But on the first Sunday in July, something shifted. It was Elora's day off. She had braided her hair for the first time in weeks, pulled on a soft blue sundress, and dressed Jonas in his neatest outfit, a tiny collared shirt and sandals that made him wobble when he walked. Caden had planned a picnic in the park near the lake, complete with a blanket, fruit, and peanut butter sandwiches, which he'd carefully cut into stars after Googling toddler lunch ideas. They sat under a willow tree as Jonas napped beside them, shaded and full. Elora lay on her side, propped on one elbow, watching Caden pretend to read, but clearly watching her from behind the page. A smile ghosted her lips. You look nervous," she said. He closed the book slowly. "I am." "Why?" Caden reached into the small picnic basket and pulled out a velvet box. Elora's heart skipped. "No," he said quickly, seeing her eyes widen. "It's not what you think. Not yet." She laughed under her breath, tension releasing from her shoulders. He opened the box and revealed a simple, delicate gold pendant, an infinity loop. In the center was a tiny engraved name, Jonas. Below it, almost hidden, was a second word, Elora. "I had this made," Caden said, his voice low and steady, "because no matter what happens, Whether you ever decide to share a last name with me or not, you're already my family. Both of you. Alora's fingers trembled as she reached for it. She didn't cry. She smiled. A real, quiet, trembling smile. I don't need grand gestures, Caden, she said. You know that. I know, he nodded. But I needed you to know this. This isn't temporary for me. I want the long nights, the early mornings, the tantrums, the milestones, the boring Tuesdays. I want them all with you. Jonas stirred beside them, rolling over with a tiny grunt, his arms flopping dramatically. Alora looked down at him and then back up at Caden. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she sat up, pulled the pendant from the box, and clasped it around her neck. I've been scared, she said. Not because I didn't love you, but because I did. And I didn't know if you were strong enough to carry what came with that love. He took her hand gently. I wasn't, he admitted. But I am now. She leaned her forehead against his, eyes closed. No kiss, no rush. Just breath shared between two people who had finally found their way back to each other. That night, as they returned to her apartment and laid Jonas down to sleep, Caden didn't leave right away. Instead, he sat on the couch beside Alora, her head resting on his shoulder, the room quiet except for the hum of the ceiling fan. Do you ever think about what might have happened if you hadn't stopped at that bus stop that day? She asked. Every day, he whispered. And every day I thank God I did. Outside, the stars blinked quietly over the rooftops, and inside, in that tiny apartment filled with big love, three hearts finally beat in rhythm, as a family, whole again. In my view, the ending of this story is not just a resolution, it's a quiet triumph of growth, forgiveness, and earned love. It doesn't rely on dramatic twists or fairy tale rescues, but on the slow, tender rebuilding of trust between two deeply hurt people who could have easily remained strangers. Caden's transformation is powerful precisely because it's not immediate. He doesn't win Alora back with wealth or charm, but by consistently showing up, with humility, with patience, and with a willingness to be changed. Alora, in turn, shows extraordinary strength. She doesn't fall back into love blindly. She protects her child, stands in her truth, and waits to see if the man who once hurt her can become someone worthy. And when he does, her acceptance feels earned, not given. Their love is no longer built on longing or regret, but on shared mornings, small kindnesses, and the unspoken understanding that real family isn't just blood. It's presence, effort, and choosing each other every single day. For me, that makes this ending not only happy, but deeply human.